wide, affordable, and surprisingly sharp, this is the TTArtisan 14mm f2.8 lens. One of the cheapest ways to get an ultra-wide angle lens in your kit. But the big question is, does saving money here actually make sense for filmmakers? And that's what we'll cover in this video. Hi, my name is Bruno Pozo. I'm a commercial filmmaker here in Central Oregon, and I make weekly videos on filmmaking technique, gear reviews, and how to make money with your camera. If any of that interests you, hit that like and subscribe. Now, on to the review. Let's start with the build. The TTArtisan 14mm feels surprisingly durable. It's actually made of all metal parts, and so you get a high quality premium feel to this lens. It has a very smooth focus ring and a clickable aperture ring. That's not the best for when you're recording videos because you don't want to record that sound, but honestly, it's not that loud, and I do love the tactile feel of it. Both the focus ring and the aperture ring have grooves on them, so you can attach a focus motor and do it wirelessly as well. This thing barely weighs anything at 445 grams, which is a little less than 1 pound. And so having this on your camera, you're not gonna really feel that much weight, and it balances really well. It has a built-in sun hood that you can't remove, but you can add an adapter to the front of this lens that allows you to put the lens cap on and as well as use some filters, but more on that later. The only issue I have with the build of this lens is that the indicator for lining up the lens to your mount is only on the inside of the lens, and so you can't really tell unless you hold it up and see that indicator. Normally on my Canon RF lenses, the indicator is on the inside as well as the outside of the lens, so you don't need to be like guessing where that is. A small nitpick, but something worth noting. Now remember, this is a fully manual lens. That means no autofocus, no electronic parts, and no way to communicate with your camera. So you will need to be comfortable racking your focus and of course changing the aperture manually. Personally, because this is an ultra-wide lens, I like setting the aperture to something deeper, like 5.6, and that way I can actually set the focus to a few feet in front of me, and then pretty much all of the frame is in focus. With the adapter on the front of the lens, you can screw on some filters. So I was able to attach my 82mm variable ND filter to this, but I feel like that's a little bit overkill, and you can introduce some vignetting in your image if you go that route. And so I really am just usually stopping this, especially on bright outdoor conditions, but interiors I'm at f4 or f2.8. Okay, let's talk the image quality. This lens is actually really sharp in the center, but as you might expect, the edges of the frame do get pretty soft and chromatic. This is most dramatic at f2.8, but if you stop down to f5.6 or even f8, that seems to go away. The same goes for the vignette. You do have a very subtle vignette at f2.8, but it completely disappears by f5.6. The lens does produce some barrel distortion. I was personally really impressed because I didn't think it bent the lines too much unless you get really close to your subject. But at a distance, all the lines do stay relatively straight. But you may need to do some slight adjustments if you want everything to be perfectly straight in your frame. This lens also performed really well on the flaring test. As you can see here, when I have a light source pointed directly at the lens, there is a little bit of flaring, especially as I move towards the edges of the frame, but surprisingly, it doesn't seem to be that bad. I don't find it that distracting at all, and I think it's relatively pleasing and gives a more cinematic look to the footage. You can also see here that you get a starburst pattern at like f4, f5.6. It gives about an 8-point star pattern, which can be really nice if that's something you're into. But all in all, the images you can capture of this thing are really nice. For filmmakers, I think this lens is a lot of fun. At 14mm, you can get really expansive establishing shots, whether that's interior, exterior, landscapes, you name it. And because the lens is so wide, shooting it handheld even while walking isn't very distracting. But if you do pair this with your camera that does have internal image stabilization, it looks really nice. But of course, if you want that buttery smooth look, A gimbal will do best, and I find pairing this lens with a gimbal creates the most cinematic look by far. You get this vintage skater video vibe when using this lens because of how wide the field of view is and how distorted the images and subjects get the closer you are to them. And when I use this lens in open gate, you really get an immersive, expansive view that I've never seen before. It's super unique and can have a dramatic effect depending on your use case. Because this is a wide angle lens, movement in the frame is very exaggerated. And so whether your subject is moving or the camera is moving. When it comes to low light, the f2.8 is more than enough. In fact, a lot of the zoom lenses I have from Canon are the f2.8 zoom lenses, and so you can get decent low light performance. You're not going to get an insanely shallow depth of field unless you're really close to your subject, but that's not really the point of this lens. The big thing you want to be aware of here is the manual focus. And so if you're trying to track a subject in your frame, it can get a little tricky, especially at f2.8. But if you do the trick I mentioned, which being at f5.6 or even f8, and then just setting your focus at a set distance, I haven't had focusing be an issue at all. For photography, it's a solid lens if you're into architecture, landscape, or some sort of real estate, and even astrophotography. Once again, everything looks really crisp in the center of the frame, and it starts to fall off towards the edges, but I think that adds a nice feeling to the image. If you're shooting real estate or architecture, there will be some barrel distortion that you want to correct in post, but that's super easy to do in Lightroom. And for any other creative photography uses like in portraits, it does create a very dramatic look to those images. Now here's where the TTArtisan 14mm really stands out. Its price. At just under $200, this thing is so much more affordable than any of Canon's ultra-wide angle lenses available. So who's it for? If you're a filmmaker on a budget and you just need an ultra-wide for some creative shots, then this lens is a no-brainer. If you're a photographer getting into landscapes or architecture/real estate, then this one is also a great option for capturing those, especially considering the quality of the image you get for the price. Who is it not for? Well, anyone who really needs the autofocus for tracking. If you really want edge-to-edge sharpness around your frame, then this will simply not cut it. And if you want lens profiles that communicate with your camera so that you don't have to do any sort of editing and Lightroom manually. But all things considered, this is a really good creative tool at an affordable price. If you want to pick one up for yourself, there will be a link in the description box and the pinned comment below. But what do you think of this lens? Let us know in the comments section. And huge shout out to TTArtisan for lending me this lens for review. If you enjoyed this lens review video, you can check out my latest lens review here. Thank you so much for watching all the way until the end. I appreciate every single one of you who do, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace.